So my name is Ogechi Obi, and my project this year was treating cellulose nanofiber with calcium alginate for plasticization. So my constraints really were to take cellulose nanofiber, which is a completely renewable and biodegradable material derived from cellulose, and create a type of plastic with it. So plastic and plasticization was measured through flexibility, strength, and transparency. So I just like my judges to keep that in mind when I'm talking about my project. So cellulose nanofiber, as I mentioned, is biodegradable, unlike the typical petroleum-based plastics we have on the market today. And it has the potential, if developed, to remove the environmental and human health effects that petroleum-based plastic has. So in my project, I set out to make a type of cellulose nanofiber-based plastic. In doing so, I used an additive, calcium alginate, which is derived from alginic acid from seaweed, so it's also very biorenewable. And I created these composite films via two methods. So I had the first method, which could be described as immersion, in which I mixed cellulose nanofiber in sodium alginate and then steeped it in calcium chloride to create calcium alginate between the fibers of CNF. And then the second method, in which I just laminated a pure CNF film with swollen calcium alginate and left it to dry. So as you can see, okay, my laptop is not going to let me zoom in. So as you can see over here, there's some examples of these CNF films. These are immersion methods. So there we go. As you can see in the data, the method 2 films performed much better as compared to their method 1 counterparts when it came to the stress and strain that they could take on. These here are the stress and strain curves measured in pounds per square inch. And as you can see here on the bottom are the method 1 films, and on the top are the method 2 films, proving that method 2 lamination stretched farther and took on more weight. When we compare the method 2 films to the control, which was pure cellulose nanofiber at 100 grams per meter square paper weight, we can see that the Young's modulus of the method 2 films decreased. And the Young's modulus is the modulus of elasticity, or the measure of flexibility that I used to compare these films. So the lower the modulus of elasticity, the more flexible a film is. So this number was significant, and it was a significant difference that the method 2 films were more flexible than the control. When you compare the method 2 films with the control in terms of strength, however, there was no significant difference in the strength. So the method 2 films in general were more flexible. However, they were not weaker as compared to the control film, which makes them a more viable proponent and a more viable competitor when it comes to plastic and replacing plastic, and such as low density polyethylene. However, the type 2 films, because they do have calcium alginate, they did absorb more water. This was not a surprise to me, as calcium alginate is hydrophilic, and I wanted to focus my project on the benefits to the properties, like the mechanical properties. So here I have the data and discussion, which is mostly what I've already said. And as for conclusions and relevant applications to biotechnology, because cellulose is the most abundant biopolymer on Earth, if it can be developed in a way to replace petroleum-based plastics, there can be benefits to the environment and also benefits to markets that have been suffering because paper as an industry has been dying out and perhaps dwindling, and that could be very relevant in a place such as Maine, where there's plenty of lumber and plenty of paper markets, however, not so many buyers for these. So if cellulose can be developed, not only can it replace plastic and improve the packaging market in the long term to be more sustainable, but can also revitalize the economies of many places such as ours that have not had the benefit of a growing paper market. So in acknowledgements, I'd like to acknowledge my teacher, Dr. Barbara Stewart. I'd like to acknowledge my mentor, Mohammed Al-Khari, a PhD candidate at UMaine. And I'd like to acknowledge another one of my teachers, Mr. John Cangelosi. And then at this point, I'd be ready to take any questions if you have them.
Okay, do we have questions?
Daniel, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Of course, Steven. Well, Ogechi, thank you so much for the presentation. That was great. And thank you for zooming in into the images. I really appreciated that as well. So first question. plastics, they come in all different shapes and colors. Do you imagine, or did you test whether like your calcium alginates could take dyes, for example, or do you see that, or be molded into different shapes? Or is that something that you might want to do in the future?
Right. So for this project, I mostly compared my films and I wanted to mimic the look and the feel of low density polyethylene, which is usually known for its transparency. So I didn't dye or manipulate it in any way. However, I think that's something I could look into in the future. Over the summer, I did do a project in which we tried to replace coffee lids with cellulose nanofiber, and some things like calcium carbonate were used to make the film more white, or pulp was used to make the film more brown. So there has been research into changing the color of cellulose nanofiber. It's just not something I did within my own project.
What about for the shapes, molding?
For the shape, and because of the pandemic, I had to do this project at school, so I could only use what we had. So if I had the ability to go into a lab and to get their drawing materials, I could change the shape. However, at my school, we only have this like 3-inch in diameter vacuum pump. So that's the shape the films had to be.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those answers.
Great. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much. I have 2 questions for you. The first question is, there are a number of other biodegradable plastics out there. Most of them are corn-based. And what's interesting is that many of them that are able to be functional and try and replace their plastic counterparts actually don't biodegrade as rapidly as we would think. In fact, some of them don't biodegrade really in a reasonable time frame. Do you think that your system would be a more biodegradable process than existing corn-based polymers?
I think that cellulose nanofiber films, because they are abundant in nature, that they'd be more easily degradable, because if you just go into a forest, you see that trees biodegrade. There's also a number of mushrooms and bacteria that'll biodegrade cellulose, as opposed to these corn-based polymers, which have perhaps had more manipulation from their plant process to their plastic process. Cellulose nanofiber is simply regular cellulose from the tree, just made into smaller fibers. So there hasn't been a lot of manipulation to the structure that would make it impossible to use a mushroom or bacteria to break down the fibers.
Thank you. My second question is, this is using alginate from seaweed.
Yes.
And so if you were to scale this to industrial scale, what concerns do you have over harvesting seaweed to be able to support that, in which you may be improving one aspect of the environment, but actually causing an issue with over harvesting and stripping ocean of valuable resources?
The first thing that comes to mind when I hear that question is perhaps hydroponic farming. It could be a larger market in which seaweed is not farmed in the ocean per se, but farmed on top of fish farms to create a sustainable ecosystem where fish and seaweed can be farmed in the same place. So I didn't really focus on that aspect in my project, but in my own mind, I'm thinking a larger scale of something that we have in our school, which is just a tank where plants are grown and fish are farmed, just to create a self-sustaining system where seaweed can be grown, harvested, used, decomposted, and perhaps cycled back into that system. So like
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much. Well done.
Okay, I think that's all we have for questions. Ogechi, thank you so much for joining us. For next steps, we will be picking winners on Friday. Well, before Friday, but on Friday we'll be announcing the winners. And until then, I wanted to wish you good luck and enjoy your evening. Thank you so much. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
job.